When The Princess and the Frog was released in 2009, it was amidst a general feeling of optimism for the Walt Disney Company. Though orchestrating the Disney Renaissance, Disney Afternoon, and the expansion of a little family run movie studio into an entertainment juggernaut, CEO Michael Eisner's tenure had become a controversial mire of penny pinching in the parks, direct to video animated sequels, decline at the cinema, and the outright shuttering of the traditional animation department. Eisner took the wrong message from the success of Pixar Studios' Toy Story and its sequel, Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo, and The Incredibles, thinking that the studio's future lay in computer animation for the sake of computer animation, rather than in engaging stories well told. And Eisner even managed to estrange Pixar in the process. Roy E. Disney, son of Roy O. Disney and nephew of Walt Disney, organized the Save Disney campaign to oust Eisner, replacing him with new CEO Bob Iger in 2005. Money was being invested in the parks again after years of neglect, just in time for Disneyland's 50th anniversary. Iger acquired Pixar Studios and promoted Pixar founder and wonderkind John Lasseter to chief creative officer of the entire Walt Disney Company. And the studio was prepared to bring back the traditional animated fairy tale film, first dipping its toes in with 2007's Enchanted, and breaking out in a big way with 2009's The Princess and the Frog. Everything was looking up. If only we knew then what we know now. Rather than starting a new Disney Renaissance, The Princess and the Frog would end up being the last Disney movie. Now let me tell you why. By itself, The Princess and the Frog is a great film, if played very safe. It had to be. It was supposed to be Disney's great return to traditional animation after Eisner had closed down the feature film department, turned over creation of poor quality direct-to-video sequels to the TV animation department, and had invested fully in CGI animation with very poor results. The problem, of course, was that Disney kept applying the same storytelling ideas to its new CGI films as it had to its waning traditionally animated films. Even relatively good, interesting, and creative films like Atlantis, The Lost Empire, and Treasure Planet failed to find their audience, let alone genuine dreck like Home on the Range. It was like the 1970s dark age of Disney all over again. Those years of decline between the death of Walt Disney and the start of the Disney Renaissance. This same team applied its same principles, techniques, and interests, and therefore failures, to CGI films like Dinosaur and Chicken Little, or simply farmed out to even more inferior studios producing things like Valiant and The Wild, released by contractual obligation shortly after Iger took over. It took a while to flush Meet the Robinsons and Bolt out of the system, too. None of these films were what audiences wanted, because it wasn't that audiences wanted CGI. They wanted good stories, well told, of the kind that the brand of Disney meant to them, namely, fairy tales. Disney has always had a misunderstood relationship with the fairy tale genre. Fairy tales were its most famous films, but during the golden age of Walt, they had only produced 3 explicitly princess movies: Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty. Other fairy tale films were much broader in their scope, from Pinocchio to The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad to Peter Pan to Sword in the Stone. Then there were folksy fairy tale type stories, but not quite, like Bambi, Lady and the Tramp, Jungle Book, and Dumbo. And then there were Disney's daringly experimental art films, like Fantasia and The Three Caballeros. The majority of Disney's live-action films were domestic westerns, wholesome comedies, and gay 90s family musicals. Disney, as a studio, really solidified its relationship with the princess movie during the Disney Renaissance, starting with The Little Mermaid and including Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Mulan, and Pocahontas. That firmly entrenched what the Disney movie was supposed to be in the minds of a whole new generation. So, to get back to itself, Disney had to get back to that kind of movie. And that brings us to The Princess and the Frog, a classical Disney Renaissance style fairy tale film, with all of the appropriate Disney Renaissance elements firmly in place, and in some cases, softened even more. For example, a more direct conflict between Tiana and Charlotte was massaged out of the film. It would have highlighted both the class and race divide between the two characters too much to have them as overt antagonists. Instead, Charlotte is a fundamentally good-natured character who ultimately forgoes wanting a prince of her own in order to help her best friend become human again. But even this change is a welcome nuance to the old Disney tropes. Good people working at cross purposes rather than outright antagonists. Disney also changed the lead of The Princess and the Frog from the more period-accurate Maddie to the more modern Tiana, a nod to modern politics and sensitivities that saw the name Maddie as uncomfortably close to the history of black slavery and segregation. Thus, the revised setting from a fairy tale kingdom to 1920s New Orleans is sanitized of the American South's struggle with racism, it being relegated to only one subtle offhand remark by the real estate agents. For Tiana, Disney also made the choice to lampshade criticisms of the princesses as objects in the story, waiting to be saved by a prince. That was never true, of course, as any close reading of the films will attest. Snow White and Cinderella are both abused and reduced to scullery maids, but exhibiting a high degree of competence and resourcefulness of their own. Aurora may be most famous for sleeping, but she has an intelligent and sly personality of her own. The point of The Little Mermaid is that Ariel is making mistakes in her own quest for growth and self-actualization, as all teenagers do. I could go on. But in The Princess and the Frog, Disney addresses ill-founded complaints by making Tiana a go-getting workaholic, whose character arc is to balance out her disordered priorities and remember why she was working so hard. And in turn, Prince Naveen is made her counterpoint, a shiftless, partying himbo who needs to learn how to grow up, take responsibility, and work for a living. The resolution to their respective disordered ways of life is the same: love. The two characters are, of course, written to perfectly complement each other. Tiana is meant to teach Naveen a work ethic, and Naveen is meant to teach Tiana how to take pleasure in life. But more than that, it is the act of love itself that enriches them both and turns them fully human. Love broadens us beyond ourselves and our own ego and ambitions and pleasures. It opens us up to become one with another person and thereby become more than ourselves. To put the good of someone else above ourselves, to be freed from the prison of our own minds, to live for loyalty, trust, intimacy, and vulnerability. Love is the means to become more fully bodied, more fully rounded, and therefore more deeply and fully human. The paradox of humanity is that you become more fully human the more you expand beyond the limitations of your own ego. I am charmed by the poetic end of The Princess and the Frog, in which the marriage of Naveen and Tiana turns her into the princess that Naveen needed to break the curse. It wasn't just a kiss that solved the problem. Love was the solution. This beautifully animated film is replete with loving references to Disney history, from a cameo by the Haunted Mansion to the Firehouse 5+2. It is richly and artfully animated in a richly evocative setting. The Princess and the Frog is a charming love letter to New Orleans and the surrounding Louisiana bayou country, reminiscent of other cinematic paeans to great cities like Woody Allen's Midnight in Paris. But the most unsung thing a Disney film needs is a good villain. As the Magic Mirror once said,
"Now where would David be without Goliath? Or Jonah without the whale? How interesting do you think Samson would be without Delilah? Getting the point? Good."
And so, The Princess and the Frog delivers exceptionally in the form of Dr. Facilier, a villain easily on par with Maleficent, the Evil Queen, and Ursula. He was himself toned down slightly, originally being named Dr. Duvalier, after the ruthless voodoo-practicing former dictator of Haiti. That changed, but otherwise, Facilier is the last of the great Disney villains, who was created with barely a care about who it offended. As a setting-appropriate sorcerer of evil magic, Facilier works dark voodoo while wearing a costume of the voodoo spiritual figure Baron Samedi, Master of the Dead, and looking and dancing more or less like Cab Calloway. Like all villains, Facilier is motivated by his own ego and cannot see beyond it. He lives only for himself and seeks expedience over doing what is right or hard. He alludes to class oppression, but he believes that the solution is to take the wealth and power of others for his own self-aggrandizement, a cause that ironically brings him deeper and deeper into debt with the dark supernatural powers from the other side. Sadly, this truism that the villain is doomed by the ego that the hero overcomes has been forgotten by modern Disney. The modern hero is motivated not by selflessness and sacrifice and love, but by ambition to prove their own greatness. "I'll show them all" used to be the motto of the villain. Now it is the motto of the hero. Which brings us around to why The Princess and the Frog was the last Disney movie. Disney has, of course, continued making films, including one of its most profitable films of all time. But films after The Princess and the Frog are different. Unfortunately, The Princess and the Frog was profitable, but still came in under projections. As a consequence, the traditional animation department was closed down yet again. Far from the start of a new Disney Renaissance, it was the last traditionally animated Disney film, with one exception: 2011's Winnie the Pooh, a cynical, disingenuous, decades-later sequel boot that had more in common with both the copious Disney-Toon direct-to-video sequels and the current slate of live-action remakes. Otherwise, every Disney feature animated film since has been CGI. It is not only the medium that distinguishes modern Disney from the classical Disney mode that ended with The Princess and the Frog. There has been a fundamental shift in the content and tone of these films. Tangled was a classical Disney film reworked into the mold of the new Walt Disney Company. The original plan was a straightforward adaptation of Rapunzel, in a style of CGI animation meant to replicate the richness of Rococo art. But throughout its 6-year development, it went back and forth between more serious and more satirical treatments, until it was churned out under John Lasseter as a very Pixar-style film, filled with Pixar-style humor, in what would become Disney's new CGI house style, a kind of generic non-style. But it still had certain key classical Disney tropes, namely love. Central to the story is the love affair between Rapunzel and Flynn, who find self-actualization through their love for each other. This is not a trope that would last. When ego and ambition flipped from being the villain's vices to the hero's virtues, love necessarily had to be disposed of. Love is about putting others before yourself, about vulnerability, intimacy, and being willing to sacrifice, which is not the mindset of the modern hero's journey. The modern hero's journey is about the girl who is too awesome for the world, so the world tries to hold her down, but she proves to the world how awesome she is. The live-action Mulan's central conflict is Mulan learning to accept how awesome she is. Frozen is not only built upon that premise, but even outright attacks romantic love. Frozen missed the opportunity to place together the antisocial ice connoisseur with the antisocial princess who can make ice, and to place the two overlooked younger siblings into each other's arms as they prove their capacity to lead together. But that wouldn't have fit with a modern mandate to dispose of love as a fundamental goal, motivation, and virtue. So instead, What could have been some amusing lampshading of the love at first sight trope becomes a mere villain, stereotyped from man-hating radical feminism. And Kristoff falls in love with Anna because they happen to be a male and a female on the screen at the same time. And even with its theme of love between sisters, it is shallow. Elsa gets a big show-stopping song for her most deeply alienated moment, and only a pithy, "Oh, love," when she realizes that reconciliation with Anna will save Anna's life and her own soul. These are movies written by people who do not seem to understand what love is. Even The Princess and the Frog could not escape revision into this new paradigm. In 2024, Splash Mountain was replaced with Tiana's Bayou Adventure, and a comparison of the ride to the film is enlightening. Debates about the content of Splash Mountain aside, Tiana's Bayou Adventure ended up being an unsuitable replacement. As a 5-minute Fantasyland-style dark ride, it would have been fine. But as a 15-minute flume ride, not as much. Any potentially controversial elements had been purged from a film only released in 2009. A significant commentary on just how quickly and dramatically the political landscape has changed in less than 15 years. Rather than a retelling of the film's narrative, Tiana's Bayou Adventure picks up as a direct linear sequel. In it, the Walt Disney Company redwashes itself by making Tiana the founder of an enlightened, egalitarian workers' cooperative. Everything that the modern Walt Disney Company is not. Far from an egalitarian workers' co-op, the Walt Disney Company Limited isn't even the homey, family-run movie studio, or Michael Eisner's singularly focused entertainment juggernaut. Under Bob Iger, it has shifted into, essentially, a high-end IP management firm, soullessly reducing the name Disney to just one brand among a portfolio of many, to be strip-mined for IP from its glory days. Eisner declared the 1990s to be the Disney decade, but Iger's company in the 2010s became the anything but Disney decade. The ride's fictional workers' co-op operates within an old salt mine, and the ride discreetly chooses not to mention who was working those Louisiana salt domes prior to 1865. The exact accusation of whitewashing history made against Splash Mountain and the film upon which it was based. Then, any dramatic tension was sapped from the ride by the lack of any villain, or even perceptible threat. Threats are scary, after all, and fear is toxic and problematic. Fear is bad, and anything negative must be purged. The drop at the end of the ride is now just a shortcut to the big party. Particularly insane is the absence of Dr. Facilier and one of Disney's best villain songs, the pulse-pounding Friends on the Other Side. As perfect a song to climb up a log flume lift hill as could have ever been handed to Imagineering on a silver platter.
Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready?
Well, why no villain? Why not one of Disney's best villains? Its last best villain? Well, the excuse is that since this is a sequel, Facilier is dead. Something that wasn't a problem when I met him at Mickey's not-so-scary Halloween dance party, or when Hades simply brought him back from the other side in the Sorcerers of the Magic Kingdom game at Walt Disney World. The actual reason was an insipid interpretation of representation. Most people, not vitally and terminally tapped into political discourse, take a pretty simple view of representation, thinking that it only means having a more ethnically diverse cast of characters, reflecting the demographics of the United States and Los Angeles specifically. And so far as that goes, representation is good. I actually like that Disney set The Princess and the Frog to 1920s New Orleans, which makes its overtures to diversity far more organic, genuine, and meaningful than merely overwriting a medieval European setting with modern America's demographics. A racially diverse story set in one of America's most diverse cities is an authentic story, whereas trying the same in medieval Germany or France or China is conspicuously inauthentic, bordering on cultural imperialism. When people complain about so called forced diversity, this is what they mean: the conspicuously inauthentic. The Princess and the Frog's setting, characters, and story, on the other hand, weave together coherently and authentically. But the concept and practice of representation in modern media has far deeper ideological roots. It believes that every character that appears on screen is a representation of their entire demographic group. Tiana isn't just a character who happens to be black. She is an avatar of all black women and must be leveled out, flattened of the hills and valleys and contours of her own virtues and vices, her own personality and flaws, so that all black women can see themselves represented by her. And Dr. Facilier? Well, he is a negative caricature of a voodoo practitioner. And under the principles of representation, that would imply that all voodoo practitioners are evil. Mama Odie is every bit as caricatured as Dr. Facilier, but hers is an ostensibly positive caricature, and therefore Mama Odie gets to remain in the ride as positive representation of voodoo practitioners as a group. And like Dr. Facilier, love is also absent from the ride. Naveen is only seen as a background character in the finale. Without love and without threat, the ride is just an emotionally flat experience in which nothing happens. Tiana needs to recruit animals to play music at her big party, and she does. The end. The animals are cute plushes available in the gift shop, and the Cajun and Zydeco music is catchy, but narratively, it is a gumbo without spice. Ah, but not every Disney movie is about love, even in the Golden Era. Peter Pan isn't, nor Alice in Wonderland, nor The Three Caballeros. Dumbo is about growth past trauma into self-love, and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow is itself a scathing deconstruction of romance. And fair enough. Treasure Planet is one of my favorite Disney films, and Fantasia is my favorite film of all time, period. But then, both films were punished accordingly by the box office. Historically, Disney has always balanced its more experimental films with its more traditional films, if for no other reason than economic necessity. Love stories sell, because it is the most fundamental type of human longing and human relationship, regardless of what philosophers and activists wish was true. So you can have your Pinocchios, Sword in the Stones, Emperor's New Grooves, and Lilo and Stitches, but they need to be sandwiched between Snow Whites, Cinderellas, Little Mermaids, and Tarzans to sustain momentum. Even films where the love story is not the primary theme, like The Lion King, 101 Dalmatians, Mulan, or Atlantis, still have a love story as part of the narrative framework. Is a real Disney movie as simple as just a love story? Well, no, I don't think it's quite that reductive. But the modern Walt Disney Company's ideological opposition to depicting romantic love is the apotheosis of their inability to create the kind of fully rounded, human, and relatable entertainment that Disney was known for. A bit of fun, a bit of fright, some good songs, and a lot of love. Modern Disney has just become soulless content, telling irrelevant stories that resonate only with girls who think the world is unfair, and regurgitating the classics while stripping them of what made them timeless. Could Disney return to form and make a straightforward romantic fairy tale? Well, hypothetically, yes. But I don't see any indication that the present studio is capable of it. They don't understand the genre. They don't understand love. Until that turnaround happens, then in the medium of traditional Disney animation and the narrative of the traditional Disney fairy tale love story, The Princess and the Frog was truly the last of its kind. It was the last Disney movie.